Hello, and welcome. Tonight I'm going to tell you several disturbing stories. Some people believe they really happened. Others say they are just urban legends. But sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that could be true. So turn down the lights, get comfortable, and listen carefully. The Angel Statue. One evening, a couple decided to go to the movies and left their children with a babysitter. Before leaving, they put the kids to bed and told the girl that all she had to do was stay in the house in case one of them woke up. At first, everything was quiet. The house was dim, and the only sound was the wall clock softly ticking away the seconds. After a while, the babysitter started to feel bored. The silence began to feel heavy, and the house suddenly seemed too big and too empty. So she decided to watch some TV. She called the parents and asked if she could turn on the television. They agreed without any problem, but before hanging up, the babysitter hesitated and said, "I have one more question. Is it okay if I close the curtains near the window? There's a statue of an angel outside, and it's really making me nervous." There was a strange, heavy silence on the line. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then the father, who was holding the phone, suddenly said in a quiet but urgent voice, "Listen to me very carefully. Take the kids and get out of the house right now. We're calling the police." The babysitter, confused, "But why?" The man's voice dropped almost to a whisper. "Because we don't have an angel statue." When the police arrived at the house, it was eerily quiet. The front door was open, the television was still on, and the curtains near the window were slowly moving in the night wind. Everyone who remained inside the house was found dead. On the floor near the window there were strange marks, as if something heavy had been standing there and slowly moving across the room. But the police never found any angel statue. The only strange thing they reported was this. In the morning dew outside the house, there were footprints that looked like they were made of stone. They crossed the yard and suddenly stopped in the middle of it. The face in the child's room. When I was very young, I became seriously ill. I had severe pneumonia, so bad that doctors had to perform a blood transfusion. I was about 1.5 years old. Of course, I don't remember most of that time. My parents told me about it later. But strangely, one image from that period stayed in my memory. Maybe it isn't a real memory. Maybe it's something my mind created from fragments of sensations, hospital smells, and my parents' stories. But the image is so clear that sometimes I feel like I actually saw it. I'm lying in a small wooden crib with railings. The room is dim. The only light comes from the hallway when the door opens. Sometimes my parents' faces appear in that light as they lean over the crib. I can't talk yet. I can barely sit up. I just lie there and look around. And then, one time, I see a face. A stranger's face. It doesn't look angry or friendly, just calm, watching. I remember the details clearly. Thin lips, small wrinkles near the mouth, almost no hair, only faint shadows where the eyebrows should be. It looked like the face of an old man. But the strangest part was where it was. The face was in the upper corner of the room, right where the wall meets the ceiling, as if someone was quietly peeking from that corner, looking down at me in the crib. I don't remember being afraid. At that age, I probably didn't even understand that something was wrong. I just looked back, and then the face disappeared, just as quietly as it appeared. Sometimes, as an adult, I remember that moment. Just a strange fragment of memory from very early childhood. But there is one detail that always sends a chill down my spine. Whenever I start thinking about that face in the corner, my cat, who is usually sleeping peacefully nearby, suddenly becomes alert. His fur stands on end, and he stares directly at the same corner of the room, the place where the walls meet the ceiling, as if someone is still standing there, watching. The funeral. We were walking together to the funeral of our classmate. He was only 16 years old. Just a few days earlier, we had been sitting in class with him, laughing and making plans. And now we were standing beside a black coffin. The boy lived in a private neighborhood. To make some money, he collected scrap metal and sold it. Before taking it to the scrapyard, he used an angle grinder to cut large pieces of metal into smaller ones. That day, he was working alone in his yard. Neighbors later said they suddenly heard a sharp sound, like something exploded. The grinding disc shattered. One of the fragments flew straight toward him and sliced across his neck. The wound didn't look very deep, just a long red line, but it had cut an artery. Blood started spraying out. Hearing his scream, his mother ran into the yard. She dropped to her knees and pressed her hands against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. She was crying and begging him to stay awake. They say he was still alive. He was looking at her, but he couldn't speak anymore. When the ambulance arrived, he was unconscious, but his heart was still beating. They quickly placed him on a stretcher and rushed him to the hospital. He died on the way there. And now, we were standing at the cemetery. The coffin was opened for just a few minutes. His neck was covered by the high collar of his shirt, but you could still see a dark stain beneath the fabric. When they began lowering the coffin into the grave, the wind suddenly picked up. The trees started rustling, almost like they were whispering. And then one of our classmates quietly said, "Look." We looked at the edge of the coffin. On the inside of the lid, near where his head had been, there were long scratches, as if someone had been scratching the wood from the inside. Someone nervously laughed and said they were probably just marks from transportation. But the old cemetery caretaker, who had been standing nearby, quietly said, "That's strange. The body was brought here without a coffin. The coffin was delivered this morning. It was brand new, and there couldn't have been any scratches on it yet." After the funeral, many of us swore that we had the same dream that night. A dark grave, a closed coffin lid, and a dull sound, like someone scratching the wood from the inside. The incident at the orphanage. I heard this story from relatives. It happened many years ago when my grandmother worked as a caretaker in an orphanage. One night, a terrible fire broke out there. The flames started in the middle of the night. The children woke up choking from the smoke, and panic spread through the building. Caretakers rushed into the hallways, trying to get the kids outside. When the fire was finally put out, the truth was horrifying. 2 children had burned to death, and 3 others were missing. At first, everyone believed the missing kids had simply run away during the chaos of the fire. The police started a search. Their photos were posted around the area, and volunteers searched nearby forests and abandoned buildings. But the children were never found. Several months later, an investigation suddenly began. It turned out the fire was not an accident. It had been planned. Investigators discovered that the orphanage director and several members of the staff had been involved in something horrific for years. They were selling children. Whenever a child disappeared, they simply reported them as runaways and filed a missing person report. In reality, the children were taken away to places no one knew. The fire happened on the exact night when 3 more children were supposed to disappear. The chaos of the fire made everything look like an accident. Soon, arrests began. Many employees were investigated. My grandmother was among them. At that time, she was 53 years old. She was sentenced to 14 years in prison. Our family always insisted she wasn't involved in the crimes, but because she worked there, she was prosecuted as well. She never made it out of prison. She died there a few years later. No one ever discovered where the money from the child trafficking had gone. Not the investigators, not the families. But the most disturbing part of the story happened many years later. After the orphanage had been closed and workers began preparing the building for demolition, they went down into an old basement that had been locked for years. There they found an old metal cabinet. When they opened it, they discovered several cardboard boxes. Inside the boxes were children's belongings, small shoes, toys, old photographs, and dozens of medical files. Each file had the name of a child written on it, and next to the name was a red stamp with a single word: donor. When the police started checking the names, they discovered that most of those children were officially listed as runaways from the orphanage, and some of them disappeared even after the fire.
Thank you for listening to these stories until the end. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more creepy and mysterious stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you have your own scary story, feel free to share it in the comments. See you in the next story.